Welcome back, everybody, to this Kansas City Chiefs live stream presented by Bleacher Report. I'm your host, Michael Darcy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Joey Segura. And over the course of the next 25 to 30 minutes, we are going to give you a Kansas City Chiefs 3-round mock draft for the upcoming NFL draft, as well as talk about some of the offseason moves the Chiefs have made to get us to this point, because not a lot has happened this offseason, but at the same time, some very important moves were made that's going to alter this team for the future. So, Joey, first and foremost, let's talk about the biggest addition to the offseason. It happened a couple weeks ago, but the Chiefs signed Chris Jones to a 5-year extension with $95 million fully guaranteed. And right now, we still don't really know the full numbers behind what he got signed to,
Mhm.
but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it's like I saw something like 140 something million dollars. And a lot of Chiefs fans were concerned about how much money they were giving him over a 5-year span. Listen, this is a very front-loaded contract. They want Chris Jones to be at his best in this next 3-year window, and I think that is exactly what they did with this contract. And extending Chris Jones was the right decision.
Yeah, I think so too. And going into this offseason, we knew they were going to pick one of either Chris Jones or L'Jarius Sneed. It was going to come down to that. And they went with the guy who's the future Hall of Famer and one of the best D tackles we've ever had. So I loved it. And when you look at the contract from what we do know, I think it's basically more of a 3-year deal where it's kind of set up where Pat's deal is like, yeah, it's 10 years, but the Chiefs could technically opt out of it whenever they wanted, but you'd have to pay him like $70 million to do
Yeah.
so. That's how Chris Jones is set up. So I loved getting him back. I think it's huge for the pass rush. Sorry, but I think that's huge. You keep him. If he left, I don't think it would have been a terrible situation, but it still would have been a lot of question marks. We don't know when Amenahue is going to be able to be back after his ACL injury. Karlaftis played amazing, but I don't know how he would have done without Chris Jones in the middle there. We don't know how Felix was going to do either. And really, we didn't have another D tackle that could step up and play most downs. Like Dana's good, but Nadi's a good player too, but they're not guys who I want playing every single down. So I thought it was a great move, and I'm not surprised that we brought him back at this point.
Well, I think Chris Jones was so instrumental to this team and what they've been, doing for the past 5 seasons that you had to bring him back and give him whatever he wanted to get. And most of the time, players don't have a ton of negotiating leverage in, at least the Chiefs organization. Chris Jones won negotiations. He had all the leverage, and that's what happens when you're part of the big three. I think Chris Jones is kind of the third piece to the trifecta with Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and of course, Chris Jones. And so it was so important for the Chiefs to get him back in this building. And I think the Chiefs' logic is we're just going to try to run this thing back with the entire team, minus the guy that just got traded, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the Chiefs were confident that if they got Chris Jones back, the rest would fall into place. And so they got their big pass rusher back on the team. And with Aaron Donald retiring, Chris Jones is the best defensive tackle in football, and you can debate a wall. He is by far and away the best defensive tackle, and to get him back on this team for the next 5 seasons, but really the next 3 seasons guaranteed, is so big for this team. Now, the next big thing that happened in free agency was the Chiefs sent L'Jarius Sneed to the Tennessee Titans for a 2025 third-round draft pick and a 7th-round draft pick swap in this year. Is it next year's draft or this year's draft? I think it was this year's draft.
Yeah, it's this year's draft, and the third round is next year, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of Chiefs fans were confused why the Chiefs traded L'Jarius Sneed for a future asset next year and only getting the pick swap this year. Also, there were some Chiefs fans that thought, oh, Sneed's worth a first-round draft pick or at least a second-round draft pick.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, I love L'Jarius Sneed. I think he's one of the best corners in football, but he was an aging cornerback who had some knee issues that were kind of flying under the radar. Every week this season, he was on the injury report and didn't necessarily practice because he had some swelling in his knee. And I think that was a big hang-up for the Chiefs, not wanting to pay a guy who, like I said, is an aging cornerback who still is playing great football, arguably one of the best cornerbacks in football last year. But it didn't make sense to give him what the Titans gave him, which was $19.8 million a season, which is just unrealistic. And the Chiefs franchise tag L'Jarius Sneed to begin the offseason. And so Snead still being on the team, there was the threat of whether he was going to play under the franchise tag or not. That would have been the worst case scenario for the Chiefs. So I'm really glad that, they didn't end up letting Snead play on the tag. They traded him, get some assets for the future. But I do understand the frustration of not getting a third-round draft pick in this year's draft.
I also think part of it that goes into it, though, is that this team doesn't have that many holes, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, there's things I'd want to improve on. I think you need another cornerback now. But that trade allowed you to really re-sign a lot of guys. And I think that's what the Chiefs are going to do. I think they're going into this offseason really looking to keep this core intact. I'd be surprised. Now this money's freed up. I'd be surprised if Mike Dana's not back in the reserve role that he was there last year. I would be surprised if Donovan Smith is not back at left tackle for 1 year, and we'll get into this in a little bit, and you draft a tackle that might be a little bit of a project similar to what Wanya Morris was, and you have them ready after next year to take over for Donovan. But there just wasn't much you could do. And to be honest with you, we are so great at coaching up defensive backs that I'm not worried about it. They've done this consistently since Brett Veach has been the general manager. You've had Fuller, who was a great cornerback here. He left. I know Marcus Peters was here. I don't know if Veach was the GM when he traded him or not. I don't think he was yet. But still,
maybe he was like his first year.
Yeah, but either way, you let him walk. You let Thornhill walk. You let Tyron walk. They have full trust in their
Javarius Ward's another guy too.
Ward, yeah, too. That's the biggest one, who was turned into an all-pro guy in San Francisco. Then they believe in Merritt as the defensive back coach to be able to get that done. And I agree with the aging part too. He's 27. The knee injury was something there as well. And I think we have a cornerback room of young guys that are ready to step up. I think Williams is ready to get going here as well. So I'm not too worried about it. And I think the asset now, like I kind of said, it's more so to me that you don't need all those picks this year. Spread it out to next year. Give yourself some more opportunities. And if you want to move up this year with that pick, you can. Obviously, it's not going to be worth as much, but you can still do it if you want to try to move up.
I just think that a lot of people were upset that the Chiefs didn't maximize the value for L'Jarius Sneed. But at the end of the day, I think that's kind of what the value was, especially because you got to think of it this way. The Titans, who traded for L'Jarius Sneed, had to immediately give him $19.8 million a season. So you were not going to get a second-round draft pick because L'Jarius Sneed had no years of team control. So it was basically just the rights to give him that contract extension, and that's why it made sense to get rid of him, and that's why I'm okay with taking a third-round draft pick. Do I wish it was for this year? Of course. Yeah. But again, I have trust in the Chiefs' cornerback room. They've got guys. And I only think that they're going to continue adding players that can step up and be like a L'Jarius Sneed, because L'Jarius Sneed was a fourth-round draft pick, and you can find guys like that all over the draft. And I think that's the Chiefs' mindset. And more interestingly, with this L'Jarius Sneed trade, I think this maybe says something about what the Chiefs plan to do with, a guy in Trent McDuffie once his contract comes up. I don't know if they'll pay Trent McDuffie because they don't pay cornerbacks. And so that is something to look at, but that's a conversation for another day. The final move the Chiefs have made this offseason that was maybe the biggest and the most loved by fans. The Chiefs signed Marquise Hollywood Brown to a one-year prove-it deal. I think it was a max of $11 million, and that's after incentives.
Yeah.
So I really like this deal. Obviously, I don't think that could be your wide receiver one, but he's got a ton of upside. He's your deep threat. He can stretch the field. He's basically, I don't want to say a better MVS, but he does what MVS does at a much higher level. And he put up 1,000 yards with Lamar Jackson in an offense that is not geared toward throwing the ball. And he kind of went to Arizona and had some down years, but he had Josh Dobbs and Colt McCoy and Kyler Murray as his quarterback. So, there's been a lot of instability in his quarterback play. But Patrick Mahomes is looking to turn this one-year player into hopefully his next wide receiver one and a star wide receiver in this offense. Joey, what do you think about Hollywood Brown? Do you think he's going to be a immediate impact guy, or just what do you think of the contract?
I love the contract. I think it was a great deal for us and for him. This is a Juju situation to me, the same kind of scenario. Not the same player, but same type of scenario. Hollywood Brown is looking to get a bigger contract next time up. Now, he will be a little bit older. So that might hurt him a little bit in the contract negotiations next offseason. But at the same time, man, I mean, this is a perfect pairing for Patrick Mahomes. This is the first time he's had a
Yeah.
true deep threat in the last 2 years that's a high-level player. Like, Mecole's a deep threat, and no shade to Mecole. He helped win us a Super Bowl this year, but he's not a guy that I want out there playing every single down at wide receiver. Marquise Brown is. I don't expect us to bring him back, even if he performs well. I don't think he's a guy that you bring back. We're going to touch on it. I think you're going to draft a receiver in this draft. And I really believe in Rashee Rice enough that he can be a good enough wide receiver one to win Super Bowls with. I mean, he was this year, but I mean, a true like Pro Bowl level wide receiver one. I think he's going to get there. So I like the move. I think it is just really looking forward to this season to try to three-peat. I think that's the goal here with him. I'm not sure that there's anything past it just because Brett Veach is, I doubt he pays him. He doesn't like to pay older players
Yeah.
at any position, to be honest with you. So I love it though for this upcoming year, and I think if we can get a receiver that goes with it to have a little three-headed monster of Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown, and one of the receivers we're going to touch on to go with Kelsey, that's a great pairing right there.
Absolutely. And I think that a couple of the guys that we're going to talk about in the upcoming mock draft are players that might be the Hollywood Brown replacement after he's done in Kansas City. So with that being said, let's get into the draft coverage and into, some of our mock draft picks. And let us know down in the comments below. I see a very active chat. Who should the Chiefs take in the first 3 rounds of this 2024 draft? Go for your first round pick, your second round pick, and your third round pick. Play along with us. So the Chiefs have 7 picks in this draft. They have the 32nd overall pick, the 64th overall pick, the 95th overall pick. So 3 picks in the top 100. And then they have a 4th round pick at pick 131, a 5th rounder from the Dallas Cowboys at pick 158, another 5th round pick, which is a compensatory.
Just say comp.
Comp pick,
Yeah.
pick 173. And then a round 7 pick. They do not have a 6th round draft pick. I think they traded up in last year's draft, and that is pick 252. So right now, the hype around if the Chiefs are going to take a wide receiver is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
And there's some guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State and Malik Neighbors from LSU. And while those guys sound great and ideal, they're going to go in the top 15. And there's no chance that they fall to 32 for the Kansas City Chiefs. And we've seen the Chiefs trade up in the first round a couple times, but we haven't seen them, since they traded up for Patrick Mahomes, go from being at the end of the draft to getting up into the middle part of the draft. So that's not going to happen. So we're looking for a player in the end of the first round that can be a impact player on this offense. We're between wide receiver and offensive tackle, and I also think cornerback is a need. But Joey, I think that we'd be very confident in our first round draft pick being either Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy or Adonai Mitchell. And what are your thoughts on Worthy and Mitchell as a pair? Who do you think is better, and who would be a better fit for this offense?
So I know that there's been a lot of hype around Worthy, and I'm not taking anything away from him. I think he's a good football player, hell of an athlete. We know that, but at the end of the day, Adonai Mitchell is the better wide receiver. He is. You can watch the tape. You can look at everything. He's a little bit slower, sure. He might not be quite as athletic, but I just think everything else, he's a better wide receiver than Worthy is. If you have a choice between the two, I very much so want Mitchell. Worthy could be interesting because somebody kind of just said he could be a more dynamic fit here. Rather than, once Marquise Brown is probably gone after next year, you still have that deep threat. But I don't know that I want that. I feel like Patrick Mahomes can take a lot of speedy receivers and make them decent deep threats. And I think Mitchell's just a better receiver overall that you can use in different parts of the field. I think he can dominate, maybe not as well downfield, but he'll be able to kill you in between the numbers. So I like Mitchell there. Worthy, kind of somebody else just said it too, John Ross vibes. And I'm not saying they're the same player, not the same injury concerns, but Mitchell is the more polished wide receiver right now. I think he's going to be the better wide receiver long term. And I'm fine taking Mitchell 10 times out of 10 to get the better wide receiver instead of taking the guy who's probably going to have better highlight plays.
I definitely think Mitchell's the right pick. Everybody's looking at Worthy after breaking the combine record for the 40-yard dash. He ran a 4.21, beating John Ross's previous time. So the guy can fly, but his weight is kind of an issue. He's a smaller guy.
Mhm.
He's not as tall. His hands are questionable. He's not as good at catching the football as Mitchell is. So I think overall, while I think that Worthy's the name that might be more notable, I think Mitchell's the better player. And
Oh
at the
yeah.
end of the day, the Chiefs need the better player on this team, not the better name on this team. And I have a lot of questions about Worthy long term and where he's going to fit. After that combine, he kind of shot up into the middle of the first round, where a lot of scouts are projecting him to be like a second or a third round, or not a third rounder, but a second round draft pick, late first at the highest. And
Yeah.
that 40 really pushed him up towards the top. But I do think that Mitchell's going to be there close towards the end of the first round, maybe a trade up to get him. But I think he's a better player for this offense. And listen, we talk about how fast that Worthy is. Mitchell ran a 4.34.
Yeah,
So
he's fast.
it's not like Mitchell's not fast. He's just not as fast as Worthy. But it's funny that people are comparing him to John Ross. I was kind of thinking about John Ross even before the comments started talking about him, because Xavier Worthy being a smaller guy who is kind of here just based off his speed. I think that
Yeah.
that's a very dangerous pick for the Chiefs, and I don't think it'd be the right selection. So hopefully the Chiefs take Adonai Mitchell in the first round. I think that he answers a lot of the Chiefs' problems at wide receiver, and he is more of a deep threat. He's your vertical option who can stretch the field. And, you already kind of have that guy in Marquise Brown, but at the same time, Brown's here for 1 year. You have Mitchell for, 4 or 5 years with the fifth-year option if you
Yeah.
draft him in the first round. So I really like the idea of getting long-term security at that position. And, Brett Veach has kind of missed at drafting wide receivers over the past couple seasons with Sky Moore and Mecole Hardman.
Mhm.
And he really needs to get this position right. And hopefully, Mitchell can be the answer to their prayers. But, Joey, how worried are you about Brett Veach drafting a first round wide receiver?
Honestly, somewhat. I think the only critique that I could possibly have on Brett Veach, and this is a constant cycle. Every offseason we do this. The Snead trade was the beginning of it this year. We start to doubt Veach, and we're like, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know if he should have done that. And every year he just proves to us that, hey, man, I know what I'm doing. Just trust it. So if he's able to, I think he's going to. He wanted to take a first round wide receiver last year, but then that huge run on receivers went in the late teens and early 20s. And when he tried to move up, nobody would deal with us strictly because we're the Chiefs. They don't want to add more firepower to this offense. So if either of these guys are there, I'd be surprised if he doesn't take it. I think that even if one of them has been picked, he's taking one of these two. I also wouldn't be surprised if it's another receiver. But I really love both of these wide receivers. I definitely, like I said, would prefer Mitchell over Worthy. But if we got Worthy, I wouldn't be furious about it. I wouldn't be anywhere near as happy as I would be if we got Mitchell. But I'd still be okay with the Worthy selection. But I do think we are going to go wide receiver in the first round.
I would just have more concern. I think if the Chiefs took Worthy in the first, they are trying to replicate the offense that kind of put them on the map with the high flying, quick
Mhm.
scoring, deep downfield passes offense that they ran in like 2018, 2019. And while it was exciting to watch, the Chiefs have played their best football when they're not doing that. And I don't know if Xavier Worthy is really the answer at wide receiver for the Chiefs. I wouldn't hate the pick, but like you said, I'd have a lot more concern. I wouldn't be as happy about the Chiefs taking Worthy in the first round, especially when I think that he would probably be available, later in the draft. But,
Absolutely.
what are your thoughts on the positional needs of the Chiefs? Because I think that we're in agreement that wide receiver is the biggest priority. But at the same time, with this draft class being so deep at wide receiver, would it make sense to draft maybe a tackle or a corner in the first round and push off the needs of wide receiver to, say, the second or the third? Or should you address that right away, going with the wide receiver, getting your guy, and not having to worry about, oh, who's going to fall in the second or third round?
I I I definitely would not take a cornerback over a receiver in the first round. I kind of like I said earlier, I really believe in this cornerback room that we have now. Is it going to be as star-studded or as dominant? No, no, it won't be. But I think that Joshua Williams is ready. I think Watson's ready. I think these guys are ready to play now. So I think you get a cornerback in the third or fourth who can help be a rotational piece. And yeah, I agree with this comment here too. I just don't think you need one that high. I don't think you do. And in terms of a tackle, It kind of depends what the Chiefs want to do and what their plan is. If you're planning on bringing Donovan Smith back for one more year, I would also say don't draft a tackle in the first round. I don't love the idea of a rookie tackle protecting Patrick Mahomes. So I think
Yeah.
that Donovan Smith is going to be back. I fully expect him to be. He wasn't great, but he was very serviceable last year. And so I think you're going to have him back. And I think that's where you take a tackle in the second round, which we might be foreshadowing something there. I think you take a tackle in the second round who's a little bit of a project, but not a Wanya Morris type project. And Wanya showed some promise when he did play. I think he was just kind of thrown into the fire a little bit when Donovan got hurt. But I think that you need to go receiver if there's viable options there. If there's good players there at the end of the first at the receiver position, don't overthink it. Don't get cute. Go receiver.
I'm not going to lie. I would feel more comfortable with the Chiefs taking a corner in the first round than they would a tackle. And the reason being is because we've seen Brett Veach draft a corner in the first round, and it was Trent McDuffie, who's an all-pro corner. So if they find that there is a great corner in the first round who's got that Trent McDuffie potential, draft that guy because it's still a big enough position of need that if you filled it with a corner that could be like a Trent McDuffie, it is worth the draft pick. But if you don't have that guy, don't reach at a cornerback in the first round, especially because you found guys in the third, fourth, fifth, even
Yeah.
like the seventh round that have played very valuable snaps for your team. So I definitely think that receiver is the biggest need, and they should address that in the first round. But I wouldn't hate if they took a corner. But I think the tackle would probably be my biggest gripe, just because I think you can find tackles later in the draft that are just as good as the guys that are going to go in the late first round. And at the end of the day, a lot of the offensive line is coaching and the guys you have around you. And the Chiefs have some pretty good interior guys and also some tackles that have been on the roster for a while. So I think they have, maybe a solution for that right now. And the guy that they're going to end up taking is going to be for the future. And with that being said, let's talk about who the Chiefs are going to take in their second round selection. With the 64th overall pick, we have the Kansas City Chiefs selecting offensive tackle Patrick Paul from Houston. He's 6'7" and weighing in at 331 pounds. And for a guy his size, he ran a 5.13 at the 40-yard dash. So this guy can really move. And compared to some of the other tackles that we looked at, he's got the size to be tackle because there's some guys that, like Dominic Pooney from the University of Kansas, very close to our hearts.
Shut up.
He could be a guy that goes in the first round, listed as a tackle, but he's going to play guard in the NFL. So I think that, Paul could play tackle at the next level and hopefully, he has some time to adjust and, sit behind a Donovan Smith or a Wanya Morris and kind of learn. And I think that having more tackle depth in the second round is not a bad thing to have.
No, not at all. And I think it just adds more competition. And also, I feel like something that Chiefs fans might not be addressing enough of yet is that next year, you're going to have that entire interior, or not entire interior O line, but you're going to have Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith up for extensions. So you're probably going to have to part ways with one of them. I'm not going to say which one. I don't know who they would part ways with, but you're going to have to get rid of one of them, most likely. So if you can draft a guy who has the potential to play inside the guard and on the tackle position, that's great for us. It just gives you versatility within the offensive line group. Now, like I said, I think Donovan Smith's going to be back. So no matter what, you're going to give this guy and Wanya Morris a chance to develop, a chance to grow a little bit, And I think that's the best scenario for an offensive tackle that's going to come in to play with a guy like Patrick Mahomes. The only time I would ever not mind an offensive tackle starting day one is if it's like a first, like top 5 pick. Like that's the only way. So I like it here. I think he's athletic. I think he can move really well too. So I would not hate this pick at all.
One of the reasons that I mentioned his 40-yard time, a lot of the commenters are saying that it's kind of irrelevant for an offensive line. And while the 40-yard dash, really for any player other than a wide receiver, doesn't mean much, even then there's some guys that run slow 40s that, are much faster on the football field. The reason that I brought his 40-yard time up because it just shows how much of an athlete he is for being that big. He's surprisingly fast. And I think this is a guy that could be really good in the running game. That's kind of where he excelled, but he also has a really good base and can kind of take on some bull rushers. And I think that, when you're going up against a guy like, Max Crosby or some of the other better pass rushers, not only in this division, but in the NFL, having a guy that can be versatile in both the running game and pass pro, it's important to have. And I think that he could develop, into a good pass blocker. It's going to take some time. I think he's a much more polished run blocker right now, but most guys can learn, with the proper coaching and give him enough time. And the benefit of taking him in the second is, it's a pretty high investment, but at the same time, he doesn't have to start right away. You've already got your bookends in Jawan Taylor and Donovan Smith. Hopefully, if you bring him back, but even if you don't bring Smith back, you have Wanya Morris, who did play snaps at left tackle last year. And so he could play left tackle for the Chiefs. But I think that Paul is a good option in the second round. He offers you some versatility, and worst comes to worst, maybe you kick him in at guard if you have some injuries and he can kind of play there. But I do think that Paul would be a good pick in the second round.
I do too. And also, your mindset when drafting changes when you're a team like the Chiefs. Right now, when you're contending, you can afford to take some swings and misses like this. Now, that doesn't mean for all 7, if you have 7 picks in the draft, you need to go out and, we're going to take a project guy with all of those picks. No, you can't do that. But you can afford yourself project picks like this, especially when you believe in the coaching the way that we do. You can absolutely get that done. So, and that's what I think last year showed it too. Brett Veach took a lot of kind of swings. I mean, I don't think if you're in the process of trying to become a contender, you're not taking a guy like Wanya Morris in the third round, who's going to be a project guy who projects to be at least a 2-year probably backup before he's ready to go. That doesn't happen. We can do that now. So a guy like Patrick Paul will just bring more competition to the offensive line room, which I love. I think that's going to get Wanya going as well. And if it doesn't work out with Wanya, you have Patrick. So I think that Wanya is still my guy. I like Wanya a lot. I want to make that clear. I think he will be a starter for us eventually. And it gives you versatility too, because I'm not sure what's going to happen with Jawan Taylor long term. If we were able to get out of that contract, I probably would. That's the only one of the only contracts that Brett Veach has ever given out that I did not like in the moment, and I still don't like. So it just gives you versatility in that spot. But I would like Patrick Paul here in the late second.
I will say one of his negatives is that he gets a little lazy at the top of the quarterback's drop, and he kind of, gets lazy on certain plays. I also saw a critique that he struggles in the running game just because he lacks some effort. So that could be something that, maybe the Chiefs don't want to do, but at the same time, effort is something that you can coach. And well, actually, no, you can't coach effort. That's the saying, but you can get effort to be improved now that you're in the NFL and all the performance bonuses and all that fun stuff. So I don't think his effort's going to be a problem at the next level, but it was something in his draft profile that I thought was worth noting. And the third player that we have the Chiefs taking to round out the Chiefs mock draft fits another position that the Chiefs desperately need, and that is cornerback. We have the Chiefs taking cornerback, defensive back, really, DJ James from Auburn. And I think this guy would really fit what the Chiefs are trying to do. He's an athletic guy. He's 6 foot, 175. He's a fluid athlete who's got good hips and very good body control. And I think that he's not probably a person that would start right away, but very few cornerbacks really start right away for the Chiefs if you're not named Trent McDuffie. So I do think this would be a good guy in the third round to bring in. He's a great athlete, and I think that he would add something to this cornerback room that already has a lot of really solid talent with Chamari Connor and, Justin Watson or I guess Jalen Watson, the other Watson, and you got Joshua Williams. So the Chiefs' cornerback room is fine, but they could make an addition, and I think that DJ James would be a good addition.
I think so too, and like this comment just said, I think the positive about the way Brett Veach has constructed this team is there's no real immediate position in need to me outside of wide receiver right now. Everywhere else you can add to. I do think D-line is another very, very viable option here. If they went D-line in the third round,
wouldn't hate it.
I love that too. So I'm open to either of those. I think that I think D-line could almost even be more realistic in some situations because Brett Veach has proven that he can get corners late. I mean, Snead was a 4th round pick. and became a guy who, in my opinion, should have been an all-pro level cornerback this year. He should have been at least
Yes.
a Pro Bowler, and you traded him and you got your value out of him for 4 years. But I think you can always add more defensive backs, and I think that DJ James just gives him an athletic corner, probably going to stick to cornerback, even though he is listed as kind of a defensive back right now. But he's
You know,
quick, man.
the
He's quick.
Chiefs also, to address the defensive back concern, or not defensive back, the defensive tackle concern, they did bring back Tershawn Wharton. They brought back Mike Pennell, who I love Mike Pennell, but he is hanging on by, the final thread. They do have Keandre Coburn, a guy they drafted in the later rounds last year. Maybe he's a guy that steps up. They have Derek Nottie. They brought him back, but he wasn't very good last year. So, like that comment said, I would definitely love addressing defensive tackle. I just see it as if you draft a defensive tackle in the later rounds, you're definitely drafting for a run stuffer, not necessarily a pass
Yeah,
rusher, because all
that's
those
true.
guys go earlier in the draft. And I don't know if you're going to find a guy that's going to make such a marketable improvement that it's worth using a pick. But I wouldn't hate it if they did, because they could definitely improve the defensive tackle room or even the defensive line as a whole, because Omenahu's out for a while with his injury. So I wouldn't hate that either. But for this mock draft, we had the Kansas City Chiefs selecting wide receiver Adonai Mitchell in the first round with a 32nd overall pick. In the second round with the 64th overall pick, we had the Chiefs selecting Patrick Paul, offensive tackle from Houston. And in the third round, to round out the Chiefs' 3-round mock draft, we had the Chiefs selecting defensive back from Auburn, DJ James. So that's all for this Kansas City Chiefs live stream. For Michael Darcy and Joey Segura, thank you for watching this Chiefs live stream in draft season, presented by Bleacher Report.